I'm Jeff Cook.
And I'm TJ Wilson.
And this is Around the Circle.
I'm walking slowly. I'm taking my time. All I could talking is starting to rhyme. I'm letting go of lonely, letting go of strife. I just can't get enough of this beautiful life.
The Enneagram is a map of the human personality. It's a tool for navigating relationships. It creates language for what motivates us and helps us look at the way we look at everything else. Most importantly, the Enneagram's a mirror because sometimes you need help seeing yourself. My name's Jeff Cook. I'm a longtime professor of philosophy in Greeley, Colorado. And with me is TJ Wilson, coffee guru, lover of theology, and Enneagram ninja.
Hello.
Boss.
Hey.
We're mixing it up. We're bringing in a new topic today, and so we have a new guest to talk about it, and we are thrilled to talk to Danielle Fuller. Danielle has done significant work, not only on the overlap of Enneagram and mental health, but Enneagram and other popular personality models and theories, and that's where we're going today. We are going to talk about Enneagram and science.
Hooray!
So welcome, Danielle.
Thank you so much for having me. It's two of my favorite topics, Enneagram and science.
It's perfect.
Come on.
Yeah.
When you think about science, for all of us who are on the other side of the spectrum, I'm a philosopher. Philosophy doesn't have to deal with data. When you think about science, what is science in the big scheme of things?
Oh, well, the reasons that you don't like it is the reasons I love it is because it's just objective. And so as I'm a type 9 and living in the gray area is hard because you can see all of the nuance and the differences from perspectives, and it's really hard to say objectively when it comes to personality or anything non-scientific saying this is truth. But with science is science, math is math. So I work as an engineer, and in that realm my 8 wing comes out so strong because I can just say nope, this is, and my 1 wing, I guess both of them, this is what it is, and I can say that with confidence, and we can move forward or not, but at least we have a clear path. And then when I go into my psychology sphere and my Enneagram sphere, a little bit of chaos starts churning in me, and it's fun to sort through, but also, man, it's so hard to nail things down when you're not speaking in objective truths.
Yeah. It's nice to have something to point to say, oh, this is like, but this is what I'm talking about. This is the thing that I mean when I say these things. Right. And that's particularly hard to come by in the Enneagram world. It's like, well, maybe some guys a few thousand years ago had some pretty good ideas. That's about where we're at. How do you feel about that? And it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yep.
Yeah.
I know. One of your recent podcasts, you were talking about how Jeff really likes changes of language, and I sit on the precipice between going both ways. I really appreciate it, and I do agree. I heard a really good quote from Esther Perel, who's a psychotherapist. She said, "Naming is useful when it expands your understanding. Naming is not useful when it locks you into a reductionist thing that gives you false certainty." And so yeah. I love that quote. I think you could replace naming with the Enneagram, and it makes just as much sense. So on the one side, I get Jeff's point. Like, you can't be so locked into the name of something that it loses all meaning. And at the same time, again, from the objective scientist perspective, words are different for a reason. Their synonyms are close, but a lot of times there is nuanced difference. And when we can't settle on set words for things like in the Enneagram sphere, it makes it really difficult to do science with it because there is no objective one way of looking at it. Like, if you look at any, like the stances, assertive stance or independent stance or aggressive stance or the against stance, those are all the same thing, but they use different words. And so it's hard to narrow it down. It's hard to bring new people in and get them to understand it. So.
And then you get the whole problem of the subjectivity of the hearer. So you have aggressive people who are going to tell you that they're upset about the word aggressive being used and you need to change that. Right. And it's like, don't you understand that you're being aggressive right now? And they don't want to hear that. So you have to change the language even though you're trying to get them to see the same. And it's just language. It's weird.
Yep. It's beautiful and crazy and weird and chaotic, just like personality.
thing that I hear there, and I assume this appeals to you in your 9-ness, is that science by its nature, if somebody jumps into the values of science, it immediately disarms conflict because you have shared language and values and you have shared standards, and we don't need to fight about that. Now we just look at, here's the data, the proofs, the studies.
Yep.
And the conflict is gone.
I think that's a great way to put it, is that when you take out the ambiguity, then there's really nothing to argue about. You can just maybe argue about what the best path forward is, but the objective truth is the objective truth, and there's no arguing that.
Yeah.
On naming things differently, I love whiteboards. I should have clarified. So you brought up one of the quotes that I actually think about quite a bit and said, I really could have said that better or done differently. and so as an opportunity to clarify something that I've kicked myself for, I love whiteboards. One of the things about language is that there's an evolutionary process that takes place with language, and there is a survival of the fittest element, that the words that actually work best end up kind of sticking around, and the words that don't kind of get the axe. They don't replicate. And I feel like that's where we are in Enneagram world, in part, in terms of our terms. In terms of our terms, we end up kicking out a handful of different, like, as you were mentioning with stance, I feel like there's all sorts of words going off now for stance. They're creative. They're seeking to put their thumb on something. And I bet you we're going to iron some of that out here in the next 10 years. And some of them are going to be more sticky.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Agreed.
Science as a discipline, it's about empirical study and repeatability. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else to it? It's what's repeatable?
Yeah, well, you're putting me on the spot to define all of science for all of the scientists. That's overwhelming.
That's what we brought you here for.
Great. I'm not at all claiming to be the expert of all science. But yeah, it's trying to figure out, it's looking for the patterns in life, looking for the patterns in the universe, the world, etc. What is reliable? What can we count on? What can you see time and time again, regardless of how you cut it? And, so my background is in engineering. I have a bachelor's of science in electrical engineering, and then I have my master's of science in psychology of mental health from the University of Edinburgh. So 2 science degrees, but I got the Enneagram coaching certification in the middle of that. Diving into it, it looked so much like science, but without the science. Everything was anecdotal for the most part, or, this is what feels right, but there's really nothing to back it up. So when I went and got my master's in psychology, I was, in the personality, individual differences classes, looking at personality research. I started seeing theories that seem to overlap pretty directly with the Enneagram, things that, okay, well, a lot of these research papers are using Myers-Briggs, Big Five, etc., to look at personality research and do empirical studies. So why are they using that, not the Enneagram? And there's pros and cons to both. Those are 2 very long-standing. But how can the Enneagram be pulled into more of a scientific realm? Because people do qualitative studies all the time. Quantitative studies are great. Data is great. It's great to look at numbers, but qualitative, like the narrative Enneagram style, like people will do interviews and then use that for formal research. So why we haven't done that as much for the Enneagram, I'm not completely clear on. I speculate that tools like Big Five and like Myers-Briggs are behavioral tools in nature. They're tools that an objective third party, a researcher, can sit and observe. You can measure. It's how you act in the world, and it's what you do. Whereas the Enneagram is psychoanalytic in nature, and it's not what you do, but it's why you do it. And that part is just so tricky to measure, because it's what's going on in somebody's head, and what they put down on paper, what they tell you, how their mannerisms are coming out. Those can be manipulated intentionally or not intentionally. A lot of bias can go into it. I don't know about you, TJ, but every time I take a Myers-Briggs test, I get a completely different answer based on every single time. Like I've gotten every letter to flip because it depends on what, am I in work mindset or home mindset? Am I stressed out? Did I have a good day? Did I have a bad day? Am I reading the question going, well, I know what that's trying to get at, and I really want to see myself as more extroverted. So I think I'm going to answer more positively on those. When I think of it from that perspective, I have a hard time also trusting personality research that's used tools like that, because again, if my number, and maybe it's a 9 thing, I don't know, if I would love to hear if any other types have this experience or if it's exclusive to 9s and are chameleoning, but I know that there are people out there who have participated in these research studies who have given their, I'm an INTJ, who maybe not be an INTJ. That's just what they are on that day. And yet research has been based on that data point. So it seems just as subjective and just as questionable. And I feel like there should be a way to use the Enneagram and do empirical research. What way that is, I don't know. I have some initial thoughts, but I'm just a little master's student. So I'm not going to try to solve all those problems myself.
Smart.
That discussion in and of itself is very much worth having. And perhaps it's the case that we can put our own contribution into the mix, because I likewise share a strong desire to see much more in the way of empirical research. Did you have thoughts on what she said? And then I was going to...
Yeah, a lot of the science that I've looked at, like, it's tricky because you see the word self-reporting and it's like that's a major asterisk on all science when self-reporting is one of the data gathering mechanisms. It's a huge asterisk, and there's just nothing that we can do about that,
right?
Because that's how the world works. People can be wrong about their own self-perception.
Yep.
And they can manipulate the data to unconsciously or consciously to fit whatever mood they're in. And it's hard, but it's not impossible. Like all of the data that we have about Myers-Briggs has that asterisk, like all of the personality data. And so if we have all of this body of knowledge of studies that has been done around these other personality theories, we should be able to do that with the Enneagram as well.
Yeah.
Just keeping in mind that asterisk exists.
Yep. And your self-reporting is the bane of any scientist's existence, especially when it comes to the Enneagram, because I don't know, if you know Michael Shahan, he's a psychotherapist on Instagram, and he also has an Enneagram. He's an Enneagram coach who found out he was mistyped and has been for years. And he's a coach and he is a therapist. And if he can mistype himself, plenty of other people can mistype themselves. So especially with Enneagram, it feels right now like your choices are either have them do that or have them take a test that any good Enneagram coach is going to scoff at, or you're going to have to invest so much time and resource into doing trainings, doing interviews, and having this whole typing initiative done prior to even starting the research portion and gathering data for the actual whatever you're looking into. And that just seems untenable. So one of the distraction techniques when I was in my master's was trying to make my own test because for Enneagram, just like playing around with it, because I was trying to figure out what would be a different way to go about it. And my theory is that I still think might have something under it. I would need more. I would need this to be more than just a hobby. Is almost triangulating onto a type using intellectual centers, stances, their outlook, and I think you called, I hadn't heard it called affects.
Affect.
Yeah, I've always called it connections, which again, the language gets messy. Anyway, but if you were to come up with some sort, those are much more narrow. Figuring out which 3 you're highest in each of those should be much easier to measure from some basic questions. So if there could be a way to ask questions for each of those, and then at the end of it, figure out where their levels are on each of that. Each of those answers is tied to one of 3 or to 3 different types. So you can look at which type is showing up in the highest scores amongst that. But then also you would need to fold in some sort of bias check to see what state they're taking it in at the time. Are they in stress? Are they in growth? Because then you could say, okay, if in the algorithm behind running the numbers, you could say, they tested high on 5 on these 2 and 7 on these 2, but it also looks like they're very stressed. So it's much more likely that they would be a type 5 under stress than it would that they're a type 7 insecurity. If their answers to where are you at in this phase of life today, how are you feeling, is like, everything's terrible, that could be a hint as well. So that's my big grand dream, that I think that there could be a way to triangulate maybe someday.
Yeah.
One of the things as you're talking that hits me is there's a very important distinction that I feel needs to be made when talking about Enneagram and science, and it's hard sciences versus soft sciences. Hard sciences are those that you can observe phenomenon under a microscope, through a telescope. It's the data is unassailable. It's visually compelling in a certain way. Soft sciences like psychology bring in a different kind of element, and it's the personal element. And as you were talking, in one of the things that, say, Big Five has going for it is it's seeking to make behavior itself the thing I'm observing. And that makes it a little bit more hard, a little less soft, as it were. But what Enneagram is seeking to do is push much more into the soft science, as it were. It's pushing much more into the subjective, the unseen, the motivational. And so it's not that Enneagram itself somehow fails scientifically or something, or it's just that by its nature, if you are going to study motive, you have to study motive in a way where self-reporting is part of the study. Mm-hmm. There's no, as you were kind of saying, there's no way around this. So if we think that motive is an important category to research, and I would argue that motive may be the most essential thing to the human experience. If motive is something worthy of research on a scientific view, then you're going to have to figure out tools by which you assess motive. And anyway, the distinction, hard science and soft science, I think is incredibly important, especially all psychology kind of gets looked down on by some of the other scientists. But so you guys are doing just psychology.
Right. You can't even see it. But honestly, my electrical engineering degree was the same. The mechanical engineers were like, you can't even see electrons. And I'm like, yeah, that's what makes it cooler is you have to be more creative in your brain to process it. You can sit and tinker with a machine, but I'm having to actually conceptualize what's going on done on that circuit board. Anyway, same with psychology. Drawn to the abstract.
Values. Well, here would be the question then, can you even talk about Enneagram and science? And I would want to say you can, and perhaps that's really where we're at. So when thinking about this, here's the overlap. What is going on when we talk about the overlap of Enneagram and science?
So you're asking, where can the overlap be, or where it exists currently, or...
I kind of have a a Venn diagram in my head. They you have the circles coming together.
Yeah, I love a good Venn diagram.
What do you see?
Yeah, so for existing science, there's not a lot, but there is some. There has been some done that's looked at its overlap with Myers-Briggs, its overlap with attachment theory. There's some others that are kind of hit and miss research, but still interesting on maladaptive schemas. There was a good meta-analysis done by Hook and his cohort back in about 2020, 2021 that looked at a lot of areas of the Enneagram, a bunch of research. So stuff has been done, but from an actual science perspective, I think it again goes down to patterns. And at the end of the day, science is humans exploring patterns and trying to figure out what we can rely on amidst the rest of the chaos of our existence. And Enneagram is a pattern. It is a very clear pattern. No matter whoever you talk to who knows their Enneagram type, if they start talking about their stuff, they don't even have to tell you what their type is. You can usually get it because of their patterns, their motivational patterns. So in that sense, that's where I see that center of the Venn diagram is pattern recognition. That said, I think then you could start getting off and be like, well, there's patterns in astrology, and I'm not here saying astrology is even close to science. So, but maybe it is. Again, the thing about science is that we're trying to explore the unknown and the unseeable. So we don't know what's out there that we don't know. People, it's fun to think that our founding fathers didn't even know dinosaurs existed. So if you were to show them this big thing, they'd be like, oh, that's an imaginative, made up monster. And you're like, no, this was like something that lived a long time ago. So same thing is we don't know what we're going to know in the future.
Mm-hmm. Is it not the case that in order for a scientific theory to have value, it needs to be falsifiable?
I don't know that I have a clear-cut stance on that. It's definitely, I think that theories are helpful, and ultimately you would hope that a theory you don't prove or disprove a theory, but you just provide evidence towards it in support of.
Correct.
So I think if it's worked towards, yes, I think that if something's a theory for long enough and nobody's able to kind of provide supporting evidence to it, it'll probably just get phased out and like, but I don't know. That's a good question.
It seems to me that's where my mind goes with astrology and with Enneagram. I mean, if you're going to put forth a theory and say that this is worth considering scientifically, you need to say, if we see this phenomenon, it will disprove the theory. It will be, it's an anomaly in Thomas Kuhn's language. So famously, Einstein, when proving general relativity, there's a eclipse that's going to take place in I believe it's in South Africa. And he says, if light bends only this much, I'm wrong. But if it bends twice as much, then I'm right. So he's given a standard by which, the theory that he's pitching provides predictability. Mm-hmm. It feels like Enneagram can slide very easily into that space.
Yeah.
Of saying if one honestly, and this is where typing, unfortunately, is such a tricky element. But if you have someone who's an actual Enneagram type, you should be able to predict some elements of their experience moving forward, where they struggle, how they solve problems, etc.
I think that the key word you said there, though, is some. And so for science, it's usually very specific, and you're trying to prove one thing. And so the patterns can be there for the Enneagram, but you're always going to find an exception. You're always going to be able to talk to somebody who is like, well, I'm motivated. I have the motivations of a 6, but I don't do any of these things that a 6 does. And I, see myself much more as this, or somebody who's not going to be able to place themselves anywhere, or somebody who had massive childhood trauma that just, they're all over the place when it comes to their motivations and their personality. So as a framework, I think that it almost kind of has to stay a theory, because a framework is a theory. It's not prescriptive, whereas saying equals MC squared is a prescriptive thing. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe I still think you can associate it from a scientific perspective and study it from a scientific perspective. I don't think that the Enneagram is something that can be definitively proven, because we're trying to fit 8 billion different situations and experiences down into 9 Instagram slides. And you're always going to have somebody saying, well, that's not me, or I'm offended by how you portrayed me there, and there's no way that's, you're missing the counterphobic 6s, which is something to hear a lot, but...
Right.
It may be the case, building on that like all models, all language, it has, by its nature, a distance from quote unquote reality. Theory in it, by its nature, is you're using verbal ticks and sounds to seek to create a message about the world you're observing. And so there's always going to be something that's like somewhat distinct. I think what you're correct in saying is, like, you're pitching a model and you're pitching a story. I mean, that's really what theories are. They're just a story about reality. Mm-hmm. In my experience, I would actually be curious if there's any other theories about human motivation. I don't know that any, like the other psychological theories, Big Five, Myers-Briggs and the rest, I don't know that they're necessarily targeting motive.
No.
It feels like they're talking about something else. Yeah. So when coming to the table, if you say, look, I got a theory about motive, what are the other... It's not that Enneagram needs to not only say, hey, we can show that this really has an anchor, because so many people seem to experience real depth of personal insight in it, but there's not really a lot of competitors. And if there's not a lot of competitors, this is the best story going when it comes to motive.
I think a lot of the issue getting past the scientific hurdle is the notion that Enneagram is a religious tool, and that it's the sign of Satan or something like that. It has a lot of stigma around it as being used by specific groups, despite it being, that's just who were the early adopters. That doesn't that's not what it was developed for. It's not exclusively applicable to those groups of people. So I don't know if I've started reading it. It's very dense, but I'm really enjoying it. Is Dan Siegel's new book, about patterns of developmental pathways. I think that's how I'm reading the book so far, is kind of doing what you're talking about, is creating a scientific theory that's scientifically backed using scientific language rather than the Enneagram. So because there is no other competitor, and I don't think that the scientific community is going to readily accept Enneagram in a scientific way, but if you reframe it as a pattern of developmental, like a developmental pathway and the patterns behind it, I think that has a chance to actually latch on and get more attention for motivation.
Agreed.
Yep.
Cool.
I think that what I hear there is that the problem is branding and sales pitch. It has nothing to do with empirical observations, predictability, or anything else. It's that apparently there's been a history with this set of ideas that just doesn't look very sciencey.
Yeah.
And I get that. Like, I'm not into that. I am really kind of put off by most new age expressions, quote unquote, of it. And there's a lot of us, I mean, you kind of see it culturally right now, who are moving out of kind of a religious tradition and pushing into more of a science-based approach to life. And they're taking Enneagram with them, or, you know what I mean? And like I said, I can name 20 people who are doing Enneagram work who that's their story presently.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Final word here?
Yeah. So my final word is I agree. I think you also, not only the groups that have co-opted it, but also its social media's fascination with it, I think works against it as well. Which it's helpful in the sense that a lot more people know about it when you see a bunch of memes, but you're also less likely to take it seriously if you don't see a bunch of memes around quantum physics. It's drab and it's dull and it's boring. It's not, what office or what Enneagram type is each office character. And like, those are obviously fun. That's what social media is for these days, is to distract us from the realities of the world. So those are the fun.
Or to enhance them. I mean,
that's true. So I love myself a good meme, but that's why I started Scientific Enneagram in the first place. Is I was looking for, what research has been done, because I had access to all the journals. I've seen that research had happened, and I was kind of like wanting a quick fix of, I want somebody else to read it for me, digest it, tell me what it says, and summarize it. And there were no accounts like that.
Twofold. This was shocking to me. I did a debate with a gentleman a while back. The lack of journal articles on Enneagram is astounding to me. There's just like a massive void where, as you were kind of saying, there could be a lot of qualitative, quantitative studies. Like, who doesn't need a PhD topic? Right. And there's just nothing there.
So I actually ran a couple of my own, because, and they're not, I caveat the crap out of them. And I actually got dinged. I was on, I did a workshop with Tyler Zach and talked about the studies I had done, and spent like half the time giving all the caveats, like, don't, like, be careful about this, and note that it was self-reporting and blah, blah, blah. And I got feedback from somebody that was like, yeah, I kind of stopped listening, because it was just like, I wanted you to get to the point. And I was like, but all of that is so important when it comes to science, because you can't, you have to take things with a grain of salt. So, but I did studies on I thought were so foundational that I was shocked nobody had done it before was Enneagram with neurodivergence, Enneagram with mental health disorders, and Enneagram with birth order. To see if there was any correlations there. Obviously, correlation's not causation, and I could get really theoretical, like dive into all of the theory of what's going on with some of those, with the results, and whether it's the personality type and the brain chemistry driving the type, or whether the type drives that, or is it just how they report and how they seek care or how they seek diagnoses, or whether they're willing to discuss it. All of that factors in, but just even the underlying correlations that showed up are fascinating. And I would love to repeat that study and see if I can get those same answers. But I would love to see stuff like that actually published and done in a much more formal way than just me in isolation.
Yeah.
Well, it's tricky because we were talking about like the social media aspect and the popularity of it, and like mimetically, we don't want all of those caveats. We don't want all of the like this is kind of general, but like maybe not really, and like we don't want the like 6s look like this, but sometimes they're actually like the counterphobic 6 looks totally different, and you have to consider that. And like we don't want the gray area. We want it to be like you are an 8, therefore you look like this. You are a like. If you are this type, you will be this type of office character. Like we want the simple, like easily digestible stuff. And unfortunately, part of what the Enneagram is a lot of ambiguity.
Yeah.
And there's so much movement and dynamism. And that's part of what makes it beautiful. But it is not, there's very little like rock solid, this is true for all people of this type.
But you said that's how it is for the Enneagram. You can argue that's how it is for personality. That's how it is for people. Right. And that's where another thing that goes in that Venn diagram is it's talking about the same thing. Like when you say Enneagram is diverse, that same personality is diverse, and people are diverse.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. That's where my mind goes as well, that it may be the case that human beings themselves, their personalities, more than this, their identity, their will, their way of being in the world may not be reducible to atoms colliding with one another. It may not be all chemical processes in your brain. You may have an immaterial element to yourself that science can't touch. And that may be a truth about you. So this is a problem that can occur when getting to these levels, when talking about your personality and the overlap with science is, as we kind of said this at the beginning, in order to do science, sometimes you have to push all in and say the only thing that we can talk about is matter and motion. But the thing about you is you might not be just matter and motion. You might have a mind, you might have a soul that's immaterial, that overlaps with your physicality. That could be a truth about you. But that creates a whole new dynamic to it that here's my philosopher coming out. You can see it. And I just want to name that as it's a tricky point there.
No, it's like the layers of an onion, and what you see is the behavioral stuff on the outside, and then the next layer is the personality types that manifest those behaviors, and then that is the motivations. And so we've kind of tackled the outside of it, the behavioral stuff. We kind of have that down. Personality, we're definitely better at things like Big Five, Myers-Briggs. Motivation is what we're talking about. There's not really a good theory or model for that outside of the Enneagram. So then, okay, let's say we finally do solve that 100 years from now. The Enneagram is proven, established. We're not going to stop peeling back the layers. So then what is driving that motivation?
Correct.
What is there? And again, we can't say that it doesn't exist just because we don't know what it is today.
Right. And that would be, to say a different way, there's 9 planets, let's say. And we have names for 9 planets.
There's only 8,
I was going to say, I think I saw an April 1st joke that it was back.
What?
R.I.P.
I'm
Pluto.
sticking with Pluto. There's 8 planets. You have names for them, but as you were saying, like what's behind the names? The names for the the planets, even the name planet, it's giving a broad term for a ton of stuff that's going on in this specific space in the universe. And if you were to pull back, there underneath this is gases and collections of, I don't know what makes up a planet. Again, not a scientist, but I would imagine that that's what's taking place here. It's just Enneagram is really trying to do work that is very, very broad in nature. Am I not right here? It's like you're trying to take 8 billion people and say, look, I just want to talk about motives at a very, very 30,000 feet up kind of level. And this motivation covers these billion human souls.
Right.
But lo and behold, that's it. It kind of works, and it has utility, and again, some predictability, and maybe even has some psychological value in that it has helped a lot of people get from here to there in terms of becoming quote unquote healthier. It's valuable.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's like it's the 80% solution. So it gets us most of the way there to understanding ourselves, most of the way there to understanding each other, to teaming, to building empathy for your fellow human. But yeah, there's always going to be that gray area that you're like, well, I feel myself in this type. I do, but I'm still kind of questioning, like, okay, well then why do I do that? Why do I behave like that? And that's just stuff that we're never going to be able to figure out and have definitively set for the entirety of human existence.
Right.
Yeah.
And realistically, we're all dealing with that to some degree at all times. Every human on the planet, and has always been the case, that we're all dealing with about 80% surety, and the rest is a jump or it is a faith step. And that includes people who don't believe that anything is beyond. There's no proof that there is nothing beyond life.
Right.
There's no proof that we're not in a simulation. Like, we're all operating on some assumptions.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
well, even the assumption that science gives you the best perspective on reality is itself a non-scientific commitment. This is an epistemological move. You are saying, I choose science without a scientific reason for choosing science. You have to assume the value of scientific discovery, which I'm all for. But notice, you need to name it. It's not a scientific move to choose science. Anyway, philosopher that I am, I want to talk about those sorts of things because that's where I'm comfortable. Not with data, not with like actual results. Hey, not with like, I want to looking at other theories, because there is something to be said about where Enneagram and its claims actually overlap with some of the other ideas that are out there. We could start wherever. I have ones to recommend, but do you have a place that you really enjoy talking about the overlap with Enneagram and Danielle?
No, not necessarily. I just find it all fascinating. So we can dive in wherever you want to start.
Perfect. The last gentleman that I debated, who is a psychologist on Enneagram and its validity, really was a big fan of the Big Five. You listed this as something that you enjoyed. I would love to talk about what is the Big Five doing, what is Enneagram doing, how are they different, and where there are kind of some overlaps.
Yeah. So the Big Five is used very frequently, as I mentioned, in psychological research. It's a behavioral model of personality that conveniently spells out the word ocean. Some of it can actually be rearranged, but let's see. You're testing me. I didn't write this down in my notes. The first one is openness. O for openness. So how open are you to new experiences? C is conscientiousness. So how much are you aware of your surroundings and your groups and being, on time? Ones are highly conscientious. Spoiler alert.
I've heard.
E is for level of extroversion. And so these are all scales, by the way. Whereas Myers-Briggs, it's you're either E or I. In the Big Five, it's just represented as one letter, and you either are high on it or low on it. And then A is agreeableness. 2s and 9s, very usually agreeable, kind of go along with the flow, easy to get along with. And then 9 is neuroticism. So there has been a study, like a published research study done, I think actually maybe a couple, but Hook captured this in his meta-analysis. So would you be curious to see what the other correlations are or hear what those are?
Of course.
Okay.
Real quick, can I specify something? I want to clarify, just for those of you who haven't seen Big Five, each of these topics that Danielle's bringing up, there's a spectrum of like how strongly you are open versus being, much more, what would it be, pragmatic or, conventional. And it's where do you land on the spectrum of these 5 topics? That's how it works, yeah?
Yep. It's supposed to be kind of a sliding scale. I like to think of it as like a mixing board. I used to do theater in high school, and I would just always look at the boards where they would turn all the knobs and flick the switches, like the slider going up and down, and so you could set different levels. And I like to think of that with kind of like every personality model, even the Enneagram. You can be sliding scales on how stressed or secure you are, how much your wings have grown, how healthy you are. So yeah, same thing with this. So for like O, openness to new experiences, think of that as a sliding scale. So I'll actually, I kind of want to put this back on you guys and play like a little quiz game and see if you can guess what the correlations were.
But by the way, speaking of predictability, if you are a 9 and if you're in theater or in church work, you will be working in the sound booth. Or you're a bass player. That's one of the two.
I am not musically inclined, and I was on the other side of the tech booth, but I did see those mixing boards now and then. And
you did not do the tech stuff.
I did not do the tech stuff, but I was always very curious and inquisitive about it because into your mind. Huh?
Were you on stage?
Yeah, I was.
Okay.
Yeah, just like high school theater. Nothing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Enneagram clearly fails. That was my.
That was your theory.
Shooting for predictability.
I love theories.
We have worked with a lot of audio engineers over the years, and a remarkable 9 out of 10 situation amount of them have been 9s.
Yeah. Well, we like to participate. We like to be involved, be behind the scenes.
It works.
So. Yeah. All right. So from, again, the O is openness to experience, C is conscientiousness, E is extroversion, A is agreeableness, and N is neuroticism. So in the findings, did they have a positive correlation or a negative correlation? A positive correlation meaning, it's very highly statistically significant, usually within 95% confidence that you'll find this if you repeat it over and over. And the positive is saying, yes, they have it, but a negative correlation is saying they are statistically likely to not, or to be low on this trait. So for a 1, which of these would you, I kind of already gave you one of the answers at least.
Yeah.
Which of these do you think would spike out for a 1?
In terms of the 5, not.
Yeah. And OCEAN.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I would score highly on the conscientious side, and I might be
neuroticism might be number 2 there.
I'm calm and emotionally stable.
Well, so the findings was the only thing that spiked out was conscientiousness, and that was a significant positive correlation. So I'll give you a hint this time. So on for any type 2, there were 2 positive relationships. Which would you guess those were?
Extroversion and agreeableness.
Nailed it. Yep. A type 2 is very likely to be those things. Okay, for type 3, there was 2 positives and 1 negative. Again, negative not meaning bad, just the opposite correlation.
I assume extroversion would be high. I would assume that there would be a negative correlation with neuroticism.
No. They actually were high in conscientiousness, which tracks with their desire to perform well and kind of base their actions off others. High on extroversion, low on agreeableness. A lot more tough-minded and competitive than warm and compassionate.
Yeah, there you go.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, on type 4, they had 2 positive correlations and 1 negative correlation.
That's where the neuroticism, I would imagine,
Yes.
is.
Neuroticism and openness. Was my
Yeah, nailed
openness,
it.
there it is.
And then what was the negative correlation?
Probably,
I want to say agreeableness.
I want to say conscientiousness.
Jeff
but
got it. Conscientiousness. Yep. More likely to be easygoing and spontaneous than disciplined and organized. Except probably if they slip into their one connection.
Yeah.
All right. This one's hopefully really easy. Type 5 had one negative correlation.
Extroversion.
Got it. Yep. That surprises no one. A type 6 had one positive correlation and two negative correlations.
Conscientiousness as the positive?
Nope.
Nope. Neuroticism.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And two negative?
One of them was pretty obvious to me. The other was a little surprising.
Openness.
Yeah. Low on openness.
I assume that they would be less agreeable.
They actually showed up as less extroverted.
Yeah.
More likely to be introverted. And 7, 2 positive relationships and 1 negative.
Openness and extroversion.
Nailed it. You're really good at this.
And one negative one? Conscientiousness.
Yep, that was it.
Yeah.
Type 8, high on 1, or positive on 1, negative on 2.
Negative on agreeable.
Yep. The other negative is on neuroticism,
Okay.
which again goes to my question I kind of touched on earlier with Enneagram is it that 8s are actually less neurotic, or are they less likely to show their neurotic or own up to their neurotic thoughts, tendencies, behaviors when reporting in some research study?
Right. Like, are they aware that their thought patterns are higher?
If they're being asked
neurotic?
a question that's testing for neuroticism, are they going to say, even if they think, yeah, that's me, they'll be like, I would never tell that to somebody else. Absolutely not.
Right.
And then the very last, and then they were high on extroversion. Yeah. And then 9 just had 1 positive.
Agreeable.
Yep.
Okay.
So that took a little longer. Apologies, but I think it's just a really fun way to look at it. Again, but those are personality things. They're personalities on whether or not you're agreeable with other people, whether or not you're emotionally reactive. That's a reaction to a motivation, a reaction to your core being, to your experiences you had as a child, your attachment relationships. All of that is manifests into some outward thing that can be captured by something like the Big Five or like Myers-Briggs.
Yeah.
In those situations, those who study and use this are studying behavior at that level and saying it's agreeable behavior, it's extroverted behavior, correct? For
the most part, a lot of times it does still get framed as just personality, which isn't wrong. But I think I see a lot of conflation with, even what is personality. Nobody's really talking about the motivation. It's, what is, it's the personality that can be seen, not necessarily the underlying personality of, what is a 3? What is a 3's personality? A 3 has a core being, and they hide themselves and to be what everybody else wants them to be. So when you're testing that and testing those traits, are those actually their traits, or are those the traits that they are, projecting out because that's what they think that they're supposed to do? What would their actual personality traits be in isolation away from anybody else?
Right.
And I see that also with 6s and 9s. That little internal triangle gets tricky. I find that a lot of people I talk to about Enneagram, they're pretty quick to identify their type if they're a 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, or 8. And it's the 3, 6, 9s that tend to get a little stuck and mistyped. Michael was mistyped. I had another friend that was, used to be one thing and now is another. My sister, for a long time, we thought she was a 3. And now we're pretty sure she's a counterphobic 6. But it's that since they're all connected and kind of bounce back and forth, and they're all so identity focused and have that attachment aspect to them where they attach to their surroundings, they attach to the other people. They're all trying to please others just in some other way, like differing ways from each other. And so dividing them out can get a little tricky, I I think.
There's a lot of fluidity within that.
Yeah.
That inner triangle.
Because you can see yourself in all of them, and you're just trying to parse out, okay, which one is actually me and which one is just me because I've been having a really good year at work and I'm thriving. So that's not me. That's me coming out into my growth number.
Right.
For the rest of this episode, go to aroundthecircle.org. TJ, Danielle, and I spent another hour speaking about all the other personality typing systems, Myers-Briggs, defense mechanisms, attachment theory, and a bunch more. Sign up for a membership there at aroundthecircle.org, and you'll have access to all our full interviews, which, by the way, neatly, easily download to your podcast platform of choice, as well as our upcoming audiobook we're going to release soon, videos, and just all the other great stuff that we're throwing into the universe. Danielle, it was fantastic talking to you. It's fantastic meeting to you. I've connected with you through Instagram, but I know you're doing other stuff. What's the skinny on what you are doing presently with Enneagram?
Oh man. So right now I'm in that stage of, trying to figure out how I can make this something that's, how I can exit my engineering career. That was great, but I've wanted to get out of, and take this to be more of a part-time and or full-time thing. So I'm in the early stages of figuring that out. I have been teaching an Enneagram in the Workplace course for the past 4 years or so. I'm looking to expand that to make customizable courses. But yeah, so right now I'm just on Instagram, and I have my website, scientificenneagram.com. And more to come. I'm hoping to also start a presence on YouTube, but that requires being on camera, which as a sciencey type 9, that just makes me want to vomit. So I'm trying to get up the courage to try to transition some of my content out of Canva and into the video space. Stay tuned.
I'm cheering for you on that.
Thanks.
It is so much more work.
Ugh.
Video is so much work. Well, desperately look forward to us meeting up again, especially as I may have mentioned this to you. Like I'm really longing to put together just an Enneagram research collective that just starts to get more data, and what that might look like. We obviously have a platform, and we have lots of people who know their type, and that might be a great jumping off point.
Yeah.
And we know lots of people who also have platforms, and I bet you we could get 1,000 people to fill out something that would be worthwhile.
Well, and that's, I guess, another thing. I haven't set anything formally yet, but I am overdue to do another one of my own research studies. So I did the one on mental health, birth order, and neurodivergence, and I actually got over 2,000 respondents to take that survey, and that was in my early days of the Instagram account. So I really appreciated having help from people like Melissa, who was on your podcast recently, and some other folks getting the word out. It just makes for really good data when you have 2,000 respondents as opposed to 30, when you're boiling it down to 9 types. And then I also did one on nerdiness, just to kind of get a little bit lighter after the heavy topic, and seeing if different types are more. There's a psychometric scale for nerdiness, so I pulled that, ran the data, and that's on there as well. So I'm overdue for doing another research study. I really enjoy that. I enjoy going through that process. It gets me into that engineering mindset. With all the life transitions that's been happening, it's been on the back burner, but I'm starting to get itchy and wanting to do it again. The quick and easy one sounds like maybe trying to do a replication study of the mental health and neurodivergence, and see if the same results come out with the same methodologies, with the same breaking down the data in the same way. So I would love, I'll let you know if any of those come out, and hopefully we can team up to get a good turnout.
Since you brought it up, I have to know, what is the clinical definition of nerdiness? If there is a scale, there is a definition of nerdiness.
Oh man, I'll have to get back
I need
to you
to
on
know
that. I will let me Google that for you and send it your way.
Yeah.
Well, if you're independently wealthy and listening and want to sponsor Danielle's psychometric work, she's easy to find. It's a delight meeting you. That's what I got. You got anything else, TJ?
I got nothing, man.
And She is Danielle Fuller. You can find her at Scientific Enneagram. He's TJ Wilson. He's officially awesome. I'm Jeff Cook. And who you aren't just isn't interesting.